just, I don't know why I've gotten everything else, but
That's so weird.
yeah. Well, I'm wondering if it's because are they coming from the
Let me
Mertz
see. Maybe.
vision or vent?
Let me see. It's my email.
Oh gosh.
See. Yeah, let's see. Program. It's coming from, yeah, the events place.
Yeah.
That's where it's coming from. Yeah, let me forward this. I forgot all of.
Maya.
Did you sleep last night?
I slept okay.
Good.
Yeah. How about you?
You know, I woke up. I'm like, okay, a lot of times I'll wake up at like 3:00 in the morning and then I'll be up for an hour and then I'll fall back asleep. And that happened last night. I think I woke up at 3.
Oh God.
I know there's a bit of background at the moment, but can you hear me? If you can hear me, can you just let me know in the chat? Thank you. We'll probably be starting in a couple of minutes, everybody.
Yeah, but it'll work. There it goes.
And Sydney, because we need to welcome our own facilities, and we also need to welcome Chicago. Right. I will also say I didn't realize I'll be introducing, so I haven't dressed for the occasion. But it is a great privilege because we're very fortunate in being able to hear from Dr. Faye McMillan, Associate Professor in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health from the School of Population Health, University of New South Wales, Australia. Keep talking, okay. All right. Now, the reason why this is quite a significant thing is that Faye is a pharmacist. She is a Wiradjuri Yina woman originally from Crimea, New South Wales, and she's, to our awareness, the first Indigenous pharmacist that in Australia. And she's a community pharmacist and is recognised as a strong advocate for improving Indigenous healthcare across professions, and is a founding member and president of Indigenous Allied Health Australia. She's currently one of 2 deputy national rural health commissioners, and she is a board member of the Australian Pharmacy Council. You might be able to pick up she's wearing something quite interesting, which happens to be a member of the Order of Australia. He was celebrated in 2021 on the list. Professor Mellon's appointment recognises her significant service to Indigenous mental health and to education. I'd like to now welcome Professor Hayden.
So I hope people online can see me. If I move, maybe somebody just whistle and let me know. Thank you, and said, it is for a socially awkward person, and honoured to be able to join you this evening, to talk my truth, coming of age, which is to recognise here in Australia, but I also acknowledge that across the globe, the inclusion of First Nations into the profession of pharmacy. And how we do that, and obviously, it starts with understanding our own truth. So that's where I will be having. I've had great advice from the PCR down into the room and having my presentation in half, and that's like it happened. So thank you. But can I start? Thank you, Marion, so I'm leaving knowledge condition for years and on with this brand, we have your nation and acknowledge this unceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And that this year we celebrated yet another opportunity for the inclusion of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples into the psyche of many and all Australians, hopefully through the conversations that will take place around the Glory Statement from the heart and what that will mean for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but also the gift of reconciliation and how that plays out in this. Much of my conversation this evening, as I said, it's not really a presentation, it's a conversation. For those online, good morning. Hopefully you've got a coffee and some breakfast. Here in the room, we are having dinner, and which is really fitting for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the way we have and do business, which is usually over food and the opportunity of coming together. So hopefully we all get that moment whilst we're here. I do also want to acknowledge Tim Ten for this wonderful opportunity, but also to reflect in 2019 when Tim originally asked for this. Had that been the case, this would be a very different conversation. I am going to talk about the coming of age, but certainly through that process, you'll hear how the last 3 years have really changed that. I do, with those who also like to acknowledge Alex, another Aboriginal colleague in the room, and also acknowledge other Aboriginal background First Nations people globally that are joining us here, as well as across all of the other environments today. So we don't have to get so I'm going to come in and out of those on camera. So I think it's a psychedelic something. Okay, now I can't get moving. Sorry. We do have technical issues. As socially awkward person now with technical issues, this is just about okay. Into a thing. So I have done this, but as I said, it is really acknowledging not only the sacrifices that our ancestors have made, but those that still carry on the fight today. And for those in the room, and again, you'll get to understand the randomness of my brain and the way it works. If you've been to the bathroom, look to your right, sorry for those online. But I was blown away by the art that is there, and it reminds me of the opportunity of being able to take pieces that might be considered junk or that might be considered not the best parts. And they are made into beautiful sculptures that represent pop culture and things like that. But it's really the artisan and the representation of sometimes because something is doesn't mean it's not good. So genetics, here. Again, as pointed out, like all of us in the room, we all wear multiple hats. None of us can actually absent ourselves because there's only one bib in which these get put on. And again, you'll notice my great artistic ability. I'm scrubbing out what was originally on the artwork there to go first and foremost, I am a woman. That is the lens in which I understand my world. It's where I grew up. It's the culture that I know as part of my first culture. And then the opportunity to be part of the broader Australian culture is represented there. But as I said, it's about what we all do and recognising that it's not perfect. This one head doesn't, make the pitch look really pretty, but it is there to remind us to be kind and gentle to ourselves when a hat might fall off, and that we have to reposition it or restructure the way we put those things on. But at the centre of all of that is these moments to understand where we are. So, pointed out, I'm a community pharmacist, I'm an academic. I work for the Australian government as a deputy national health commissioner. I'm passionate about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. I'm passionate about mental health. I'm passionate about rural and remote communities being seen as equal rather than less than. And that every Australian and indeed every person in the world should be able to access quality health care by competent and qualified human beings that are able to provide that care. So where did the journey start? And for me, again, it's my story and this opportunity to be celebrated, which hadn't always sat comfortably. In the conversation you did hear that I was recognised as the first Aboriginal person to receive a Western pharmacy degree. But as many people across the globe have been practicing pharmacy, and as part of the oldest surviving culture in the world, we understand our pharmacopoeia, we understand our environment, and we understood what that meant for us. So it is that acknowledgement that whilst I first in Western trained pharmacy and in the profession of pharmacy as we know it today, but it's the opportunity that as a profession we also have the opportunity to evolve and to create different relationships and different meanings. So who am I and why does it really matter? And for many of us, being able to tell our story or our truth isn't always something that is given. I do acknowledge privilege and the honour that comes with being able to do this, but I also recognise that there are others that can't and that don't get these opportunities, and that I have a responsibility and obligation to ensure that there are spaces made through my truth. So understanding that. So here in this photo, a few years ago, the National Aboriginal Day of commemoration, so NAIDOC, which we just recently came out of, was because of Who We Can, which was the year that in that year the NAIDOC celebration was about recognising the matriarch and the women that have at times not been as celebrated for their fights and the recognition that they deserve. And so for me, these form a part of my reason. So the lady in yellow, that's my mum. A woman who grew up in the 40s and 50s, being denied access to her culture because of policies that meant she was unable to learn language. She was unable to attend school. She was unable to do that because the lady on the other end, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who was a domestic servant. Australian Archives and Slavery. She worked for a very wealthy family until she asked to be released and was granted that through the Aboriginal protection and the recognition that she could then go and live her life, but unfortunately still in jobs that I now don't have to do. Was saying earlier, hat off to all of the wage staff and the amazing work that they do, because probably my least favourite job ever. But she took a job in the cleaner at the public school, the central school in Tony, and worked ridiculously hard. My mother chipped cotton, so she was gone at 4 a.m. in the morning. You know, I don't come from privilege, but I recognise my own privilege now. But it was because of that woman on the end that said the only way you will get out of it is through education. Of 8 children, none of them who, at the time of the death, had been able to go on and study at a tertiary facility or even finish high school. Since then, we've had 23 grandchildren. There is now 11 bachelor's degrees. There are 4 masters and 3 PhDs. In one generation.
Sorry, Faye, could you come over near the computer because we can't hear you?
Who passed away at the age of 35. So the very last day was studying her Master's of Education, gained an opportunity to transform lives through education. She lived and breathed that, and again, I pay homage to these 3 women, and I'd like all of you to reflect on the women that have influenced your lives and why. So that's mine because of her we can statement. The next one though is the remainder of my siblings. I'm one of 5. In the top, sorry, whichever way you're looking at it, with the other lady, that's my sister Deanne. Mother's one of the longest, he's going to university, but retired at the age of 35. So, yeah, all sorry. Not too bad. Again, in the middle there, that was my mother's graduation at the age of 65. She got to walk across the stage with a Bachelor of Health Science and Mental Health. She wanted to help her people. She wanted to recognise the trauma that had been informed and use her lived experiences to try and make things better. I was fortunate to be joined on that day as part of the academic profession at CSU. The gentleman in the army is my brother who has a Master's of Mechanical Engineering and owns 3 businesses. The other gentleman has a doctorate of Environmental Sciences, professor, and myself at the time. The ability to be able to recognise the opportunities that we have in this generation that did not exist when my mother was growing up, and that she could still take those opportunities and do something different. At the bottom forms my other part of my why, which is my 2 sons, single parent, and I am blessed that they came into my life to provide a different reason for me to ensure that the future generations are what I move toward. And that's early this year. They're both now 6'4". Those on the line and those in the room, I know tell them I'm in a session. I'll be very short body to you. I'm going on the panel. But it does remind me of the opportunities that they will get because of the sacrifices and those moments that we've taken along our way to do that. So again, my way. But this is where it all started. So training Central Western New South Wales, 74 kilometres west of Dubbo, being there good luck to you. It's something that is truly a gift that don't keep on giving. And the reason I put up these images is to demonstrate that from little things, big things can grow. It's still only a town of roughly 1,000 people. The topic's becoming good. So a generation where my mother and grandmother were unable to go to the pool, but then I was able to, during my generation, swim in the local pool. So I used to hang over the fence many nights watching the glitterati of the training society and wishing that I was one of them. I no longer wish that. In the middle though, so after my mum and nan and her family moved from the mission, which wasn't allowed in town but lived on the fringes of the cow. Moved into town, they moved into a tent. Nan had 8 children. Then we moved into 100 Vanderloo Street, the last house in Training, before you head out to the other side. It was a 2-bedroom home that housed not only 5 of us. Nan still had younger siblings of my mother at home. She also had the care of cousins that lived with her. So at any given time, there was anywhere from 12 to 14 people living in 100 Vanderloo Street. And then we've got the Gunja Aboriginal Cultural Centre, which when you now go to training is a reminder. Sorry. Right.
Sorry.
I shall now stay here. Thank you. Now I've lost my train of thought. No. But so the Wurundjeri Cultural Centre now is a constant reminder of the influence and the prosperity of Aboriginal people in and around Trangie and what they provided to the town. Totally separate, but it's about what can you give back. And so having a yarn up down the end with the ECRs and, you know, all awesome human beings, and saying, you know, apart from all of these other jobs, that we actually have 6 family businesses that we run, and part of it is to ensure the economic viability of what is still our hometown. Probably a bit morbid, but that's all where we will all go back to when we no longer get to walk the earth, and that we will go back to, because that is home, that's our country. And then the other part is the Trangie pharmacy. For me, which is where my pharmacy journey started as a 19-year-old, as a shop assistant in the pharmacy. And it was such a privilege to be part of the community in such an intimate way, to hear the stories that would be told as people waited for their scripts or came in to buy the 21st birthday gift, or ask me what shade of lipstick went well with this particular outfit. You know, it was such a privilege to serve with the community that after a while, I actually thought that Peter Dixon, who was the pharmacist at the time, and shout out to Peter for this, that I went, he's getting paid a shitload of money. Sorry for anybody online. Getting paid a real lot of money, and I'm doing his job. That's what I thought. You know, by this stage, you know, I'd progressed. I'd done the dispensary tech program and course, and like, yeah, I'm definitely getting paid not as much as I should be, and so I'll be a pharmacist. Oh, wow, that was not my smartest move. Or it was. So that's where it started. At the age of 19, I'm now only 24. I've had a hard life. But it's in this, and as I said, this opportunity to be really part of the community that started me really thinking that I could do this. I could really be that professional that the community values, that the community comes in and tells you that they've had a grandbaby or that they're pregnant or that we've lost so-and-so. And so you become woven into the fabric of what the community sees as an integral part. And so that's where it all started. And said, happy birthday to me. 21 age. It was 21 years ago that I graduated from pharmacy this very year. Only a few months, it was in April again. I remember it like it was almost yesterday. And that it was at that time, you know, didn't know that I was the first Aboriginal person to receive a pharmacy degree. And so that's played out over the last 41 years.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr.
So it started at CSU where relationships and the notion of relationships really are. It was in the inaugural year that CSU started the pharmacy program in 1997. And it came about through a conversation, not through an application, not through any of the normal means. I'd run up to find out what science did I really need to take as I don't go to take. I certainly didn't do anything at high school. So, you know, okay, I'll start this journey. That was a Wednesday. I had an offer on a Friday. Uni started on a Monday. I got a caravan. I moved. And it really put me on a journey that to this day keeps changing. I was really crap. So sorry, not the worst pharmacist student ever. That probably does go to me. Failed. Academic probation, all the things that you go, not the cream of the crop, probably even say the cream of milk. But it really was though. It lit a fire underneath me that failure often does. Oh, I've got to strike close. That it was, wow, I can't let people down. You know, Mark Burton, who was the head of school, and these are things that you go, they're people you remember that took a chance on me, and it was like, I'm not going to let them down. I will keep coming back. And at that time, I owned a takeaway shop that was 2.5 hours from where I was studying university. So I leave Power at 5 a.m. on a Monday morning, drive to start university by 9 a.m. And then I leave straight after lectures on Friday afternoon so I can get back to the Friday night rush. And let me just say, I can put them in but I then would work until 9:20 and get up and start again at 5 a.m. And in all that time, I was also doing assignments, whatever you'd like to. Through a typeset, you know, I was really interested in what my title page was like because I thought my material was going to be really interesting that I could institute on the front. And that was demonstrating my knowledge of science. But I really was committed. And as I said, there were again individuals in that cohort that didn't need to be nice to me. They could have been pleasant, but didn't need to be nice. Emily DeBrose is one of them. Again, another amazing human being that saw another one floundering and thought, I can do something here. And she did. She offered to work with me, which meant, hey, let's move this along. And so that's what we did. What happened then, though, as I said, was this sliding door moment of you are now the first. What was also happening simultaneously, for those that have heard my story, I really apologise that I'm rehashing some old ground. But in that time of those relationships, the woman that was in the middle of, because of her weekend, my sister became ill. And so again, the life changed. And so Mark Burton again made sure that I could do labs at night, that I could cut down what was 27, 30-hour face-to-face content into 2 days. So that if it wasn't me with my sister, it was mum with my sister and her 3 children. And, you know, it's those moments that make you either hungry or just go, you know, don't want it. And there were moments that, you know, I didn't want it. But there were people that reminded me why I had started. But in this process of understanding, you know, the isolation that comes with being the first, not just the privilege that comes with being the first, though, the isolation that can come from that, was the opportunity to talk to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that have been doing other degrees around the sciences and the health sciences. And so Indigenous Allied Health Australia was started. And it was started simply out of solidarity. It was the moment to not feel so isolated. And we are here talking about the revolution that is taking place in pharmacy schools, and I'm going to everyone there and here in the room, and I will also touch on some of the international experience. But there is a moment to ensure that the experiences I had of isolation, of not seeing, not just the value of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people or First Nation people represented in the curricula. It was, where are the others like me, or that look different to me, but have similar experiences. So Indigenous Allied Health Australia was born out of that. Out of 9 professionals that sat down together and said, what do we do? How do we create an environment? And now it's considered one of the peak Indigenous organisations in this country that represent allied health. And this is where, you know, the cobweb of connectedness, had I not had that experience, the opportunity to stand as, you know, one of the 2 Deputy National Rural Health Commissioners that represents allied health, wouldn't have taken place. Again, it would have been a sliding door moment and would have been for somebody else. Now, I'm just going to be a little political here, that when the Office of the National Rural Health Commission was set up, and then as an independent statutory body, the notion that, not on film, but the world didn't revolve around GPs. That will come out later, yeah. The recognition that our health system is made up of such diversity, and how does diversity get represented? And that, I think, came back to, again, that desire through Indigenous Allied Health, again, of how do we represent diversity? How do we share experiences and similarities to create a future that we all want to participate in? And so when they said, yep, we can have deputy commissioners that represent nursing and midwifery and allied health, we will have 2 deputy commissioners, but we need one of those to at least represent Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health as well. So again, I am not saying it is a burden, but it's the reality that many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people face in this country, of the multiple hats that you are asked to wear continuously, because I represent allied health as a pharmacist, but I also represent Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities through those roles. But again, the minister at the time wanted those 3 distinct but aligned functions. And so I think this is where the challenge will still exist for us, because we have to look at different ways. We have to see We can't rely on funding being given to us from governments to change systems. And that's essentially what we're doing. We're changing the system.
Stay close.
Stay close. We're sniffing plants now. But in a good way. So, which brings me in a way, and I'll go back and move forward probably a bit like, luckily I've had no alcohol this evening, but it would look like a drunken dance. But it comes to Libby, which is the Leaders in Indigenous Pharmacy Professional Education. But where did it start? So I've sort of brought you up to 2019. And I know some of you were also in the room when I was asked to give the Lawyers Answer and finish that show series that day. It was because we had a person who had come from another country and coming back from another country that had seen the struggle of First Nations, the Maori peoples of Aotearoa, try and find and position themselves not only as the first people, but as professionals. And so it took somebody from another country to look around the room and go, well, where's our first people? Where are Australia's first people that are in the pharmacy profession? And that's where Brian Clark again reached out and said, hey, will you do this? And again, as I said, I really don't like public speaking. It's not my favourite thing. But as I said, I recognise that through privilege, sometimes you have to be uncomfortable. And when you make yourself uncomfortable, you give yourself the opportunity to grow. And so I accepted that offer. Not only did I accept that offer, I was asked to apply for a position on the Australian Pharmacy Council. It was in that moment in 2019 that I stopped running into the doors that were sliding and that I wasn't finding the gap. And, you know, that brain-acquired head injury that I'd sustained pretty much over the last 18 years was starting to subside because there was a person who went where our first peoples. So it was in that moment that happened. And then what happened was that cobweb of relationships and people going, what's next? So what? We've got an Aboriginal person representing on here. Oh, well, maybe the board could have an Indigenous advisory group. Or we get a whole heap of black fellas together and ask them to be advisors, and we go, shut that. We're not advising you. We are here to form part of your strategy. So we went from being the Aboriginal Health Advisory, the Indigenous Expert Advisory Group to the Indigenous Health Strategy Group that informs the work that the Australian Pharmacy Council does. Not only that, they became a standalone pillar in the strategy of the Australian Pharmacy Council we took away improving Indigenous health because we weren't improving shit, it's still shit. So let's stop improving it. Let's just change. It's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. We want to be part of a narrative that is changing the experiences of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are in receipt of the care that pharmacists provide, but we are also responsible for the environment and the cultural safety of the profession in which we ask Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to become part of. And so it was at that moment, the individuals that were involved in that, Leanne Curran from Aotearoa, Justina Peck, Alina Williams, and Johnny Briggs, that went, let's not just be ambitious, let's be courageous. Let's ask for what was previously the no to we got a yes. And on May 16th, Libby was launched. You know, whether you choose to wear the Zipline Plus football appointment, or whatever it is, it's that public facing opportunity to pledge that you will do something different. And so Libby became part of the reality of ABC and ZBN. And as I said, what this took, look at my book not written now, what this took was moments, and when we look at the moments of history that have changed the trajectory into the future, it wasn't systems, it was people. So we had moments of people that, in my analogy, I'm sorry for everybody online, may not be the right one, but it was the Nelson Mandela moment and the FW de Klerk. Nelson Mandela put forward these concepts of the United South Africa and this opportunity that through what was trauma, things could change. He couldn't make those legislations though. It took somebody else to accept that through their privilege they had to do something with it. So it took FW de Klerk to sign that release of Nelson Mandela, to stand shoulder to shoulder with the man that he knew the majority of South Africans, Black South Africans, stood with, and was willing to accept that that was what it was. And so we have people in our professions that are doing that exact thing of recognizing what can I do with my privilege and how do I make the future a better place. Next year. But why? So again, you saw my why, but this is why we are doing it. What we know globally, and this is certainly for both other cohorts online as well as those in the room, we are starting to understand more about the racism that is inherent, not just within our profession, but within society. We have seen it play out across the pandemic. And that, but the impacts of racism and the barriers to access and health really do cause a negative impact on the health outcomes for Indigenous people, irrespective of geography. We are knowing this, the World Health Organization is recognizing, and we need to understand what it is we need to do to address racism, as it is the key to increasing the uptake of health and improving health outcomes. And it's not just a little bit, as I said, this isn't just the improving, you know, when you say, oh, well, it's now 2% better, well, it's still 98% crap. You know, it's from the perspective in which you have the luxury of living. And when you don't look at the whole picture, you just say, oh, well, we improved it 2%. And for those 2%, yes, it is a great outcome. But what about the other 98%? And we need to make sure that we are focusing on the collective and not just the individual moments. Again, earlier this year, the year just flying by. Earlier this year, we saw here in Australia the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Workforce Plan and implementation plan that sat alongside of that. So not only are we saying this is very nice, we're actually telling you how to do it. You know, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and organisations sat around and went, how do we change the perception of the non-Indigenous workforce, of the inclusion of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people into it and the value that they bring? It's getting closer.
Getting further away.
Sorry, it's like, it's just getting closer. And that it is the transformational knowledge. Oh, all of the 45 minutes. I was going to cut it down. Sorry. That we need to have. There is a transformation and a shift that needs to take place. And it is the inclusion of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and First people around the globe that will change that. I'm skipping a couple because I want to get to, you can all read that. But this is the recognition, though, that Australia is the only place where transformation is taking place. Aotearoa, so the Māori Pharmaceutical Association, was started in 2002. We do have a bit of a way to go, and I know that Leanne has a frustration at how slow we are at the pace that we currently have. And for those that are sitting on the working group, I'm being deliberately slow because as the oldest surviving culture, we have time and we need to do it right and we need to do it once. And so we have lessons that we can learn from our Māori brothers and sisters around what that looks like. And I believe, my humble opinion, I think we would not be showing our true intelligence if we didn't take those learnings that have been there. But the other part that I'm really excited about was at the end of last week, I got to sit with Amy Ann and Jared Sidrovich, Canadian Indigenous pharmacists, who on June 10th, through the Canadian Pharmacy Association, also have started their journey of an association that recognises their First People. And so we've linked up and we are going to ensure that we don't have to relearn things or experience things that can be avoided, particularly if they're traumatic. And so it is happening. I'd like to acknowledge the late Erica Secretary for her work in the literature review around the cultural capabilities of the pharmacy workforce here in Australia, that it drew on that. So my ask to the Chicago cohort is please, if you know of First Nation pharmacists in the country or their experiences, please reach out so that we can start to wrap our arms around each other and do this in true solidarity with other First Nations communities and recognise their value to their pharmacy system. But what can non-Indigenous pharmacy professionals and other healthcare professionals do to better support their Indigenous patients? And this is a centre of what we do. And I'm taken from Amy Ann, and this is the last quote that I've got. It really showed me how inarticulate I've been over the last 20 years of being able to put my case forward for this to happen. But we firmly believe that education is critical and foundational to providing the best possible care for Indigenous patients. Our primary, secondary, post-secondary education systems have not best prepared health professionals to either understand the ongoing systems of oppression at play that contribute to poorer health outcomes for Indigenous peoples, or to engage in health practices that are anti-racist and anti-oppressive. Forming a trusting relationship based on authenticity, service, shared stories is central to supporting Indigenous patients. It is incredibly important to be patient and sensitive to the tenacious relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and Canada's health system, and insert Australia, insert New Zealand, insert other First Nations into that, with respect to the historical and ongoing experiences of racism and discrimination. We advocate for healthcare that is intersectional, affirming, anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and accessible. We are confident that in practicing this way, we will better support Indigenous patients and indeed all patients. Mandango, thank you. I've got more. I really thought I was going to struggle. Shut up, hey. Thank you to those online, and thank you for being such a respectful Ninjamara audience, and the laughing and we thought it was a little bit funny and all of the above. Thank you for the staff that it.
Kim said you can see.
I can sit. I can sit. Sit dog.
I'm looking for him now. Oh, there he is. He's there. Israel, if you want, you can start sharing your slides.
Can you hear me okay? Let's start testing one thing at a time.
Where's mine?
Looks like I am unable to share my slides as I had feared. So can someone else help me?
Hold on. So don't start
Yes.
yet. I just got to
I
get the
think I-
sound right.
Okay, sure.
Oh, not yet. Oh, no, I'm trying to get the speakers working first.
Okay. I can be patient, that's okay. Oops, I just
Sorry.
lost your audio. You can't hear me? It looks like
No,
there
I'm
are
trying
other
to connect
people
the-
on.
Yeah,
Oh,
So we-
okay, okay.
the room.
Take-
At the
Take
moment,
your
you're only coming
time.
through on the laptop.
Sounds great. Take your time.
It's meant to be searching. Ah, I think. All right, Israel, just give us a sound check.
How about this?
Hold on, we're still working on it.
Okay, take your time.
This speaker? It's connected to it, it's just not playing his sound through it for some reason. Can you play it again, the music? Yeah, we could. Are you outputting from Zoom as it is? Obviously not. Oh, hold on. Yeah, you.
Others on Zoom can hear me quite perfectly. I think we're only waiting for you to work it out in the room. Yeah.
All right, Israel, give us a test now.
Can you hear me? Test one, test two.
All right.
Perfect.
All right.
You'll
hold
also
on.
have to help me with the presentation. I'm having a permission issue with my work computer.
Oh, that'll be loud enough when everyone shuts off. And I'll put it all away. All right. Did you say, Israel, you want us to put the slides up here and run them through for you?
Yes, please, if you don't mind doing so.
You can share access.
That's perfect. If you, I'm happy to get started if everyone is ready. Okay, Neil, I'll get started if you respond to my first prompt. Please go to the next slide, and then it will start playing a short video.
Tim's just going to do an introduction of you first.
Oh, okay. You should unmute yourself so that we hear it on Zoom as well.
Good evening, everyone. Good morning in Chicago. Good evening, everyone. Good morning to our dear friends in Chicago. Good afternoon to our dear friends in Bethel. Good evening to Australian colleagues in this Thai restaurant in Newtown in Sydney, and all of our friends online. Thank you very much, Faye, for an excellent and very moving presentation. Thank you for sharing your story. And for all of the work that you keep on doing to such a high and professional level. Dear friends and colleagues, we're absolutely privileged today to have two outstanding dinner speakers in Australia, breakfast speakers in Chicago, and afternoon speakers in Basel, Switzerland. It's my very great pleasure to introduce Mr. Israel Bimpe. Now, I first met Israel as a young pharmacist at a FIP Congress a number of years ago, and was super impressed with all of the excellent work that he had done and continues to do. I'm sure everyone is going to be completely intrigued by his presentation today. So Israel Bimpe, up until a few days ago, was Director of Africa Go-To-Market at Zipline, where he was the spearhead of the expansion of Zipline drone delivery, so drone delivery of medicines across the continent. Israel's on the board of directors for Irembo, whose pioneer product, Irembo Gov, is a government service platform in Rwanda. Israel's a Rwandan pharmacist. Israel previously served as the president of the International Pharmaceutical Students Federation. And he's got a fantastic presentation to share with us this morning, afternoon, and evening. So please welcome Israel to the virtual podium.
Thank you so much, and thank you again, Prof. Tim, and the organizers for the invitation to speak today. I would have so much wished to be in person at one of the hubs, but unfortunately I couldn't make it. I think it's also a call to at least try and have a hub on the African continent next time, and hopefully we can host it here in Kigali. And that's something that will definitely get some of our colleagues to work on. I hope this has been a great experience so far and a great conference. I'm happy to tell you a bit about Zipline, our story. And, you know, as much as we're a logistics company, I think from an innovation perspective, we are really reimagining healthcare and how it's provided. And being a pharmacist, it's such an honor and privilege to be at the forefront of this kind of technology, and really having been leading its work in Rwanda, its expansion across the continent, but also shaping how it works into the future. So I'll get right into it, and I'm happy to take a few questions later on. Next slide. Awesome. So this is a short video about our operations on a daily basis, and it shows you all facets of what it is that we do from our hub. I think the first thing you saw was a warehouse where we store and keep products, and you have pharmacists, nurses, lab technicians, pretty much pick and packing and receiving orders. And then you have the drones in the lower right corner taking off and landing. They take off on a catapult and they land on in a similar manner as aircraft do on an aircraft carrier, although it's on a raised platform for us. And then on the left side, you kind of see our radius of coverage. That's about 80 kilometer or 50-mile radius that we cover. And our drones are fully autonomous. And so they are flying out, going to different hospitals, flying on what we call highways in the sky to go make deliveries. And this is a scaled operation pretty much. So what you see, sometimes it's one drone that's going out to make one emergency delivery. And sometimes you see 10, 20 drones going to a different health facility or to the same health facility. And usually that means that particular health facility entirely rely on us because they are either isolated or there was a flooding, or it's just the best thing to do in the logistics and supply chain of that particular product or that particular health facility. And so this video goes on for about 2 minutes and kind of goes on from 6 a.m. To 7 p.m. when we close our operation. And you will have realized that we've delivered more than 100 packages and more than 700 to 800 medical products. And we can fly multiple zips or drones at the same time. So this is kind of an introduction to what it is that we think is a scaled drone delivery operation in the world. I'll spare you watching it until it ends, but it's an interesting video and an interesting operation that we get to do. Next slide, please. I think what I was saying is really on the continent in Africa, particularly, half of the population lack regular access to life-saving products. And many of you, where you are calling in from, you can relate to this, whether it's in urban area, whether it's in a rural area, whether it's developed or developing country, really accessibility to healthcare is something we haven't gotten right yet. And there are multiple facets to it. And we are trying to solve it in one of the many ways that are available. Next slide, please. The way that we've seen it, at least on the African continent and in Ghana, is it takes anything between 8 to 26 days to get an order filled, and this is at a systemic level. This is for a small clinic or a health facility to get resupplied. Often than not, when a clinic places the orders for products that they need, it is never filled in full. They always get less and less products than what they requested. It's always unreliable and it's cost ineffective. It's quite expensive to deliver every product that you need, and it's never delivered on time. So the stock outs can be anything from 1 month to 3 months, and sometimes it's even years before a product is restocked in healthcare systems and supply chain systems. And there are multiple aspects to it, and some of those are really related to the logistics part of it. Next slide. So what we are trying to do is really build an autonomous logistics that serves all people equally. We want to create an experience of feeling like your products are like teleportation. When you need them, you get them, essentially. And our goal is to really be able to provide every human on Earth with instant access to vital medical supplies. Next. And we do that by operating what we call an on-demand supply chain service, where we use drone as a delivery mechanism but we also do the warehousing and delivery aspects directly to people who need them. And I'll kind of explain to you a bit how it works in the next few slides. Next, please. And so we have 3 aspects of our services. One is the delivery aspect. So I'll tell you what the drone does. Then we do have the warehousing and fulfillment. I think this is pretty standard, and I'll tell you how we've thought about it. And of course, the data piece of it that really informs decision-making and policy-making. Next slide. And here you'll kind of get to learn about our technology and the drone itself. So you probably saw this. You see the first aspect is the loading, the launching, and then the recovery of the drone. As I said, the drone operates at an 80-kilometer radius. That's about 50 miles, and so it can fly 160 kilometer or 100 miles. The delivery happens to about 2.5 parking spots, so that's about 5 by 5 meters. It can cruise at 100 kilometers per hour, and it has a payload of about 1.8 kilograms. We are able to transport any type of products. During the pandemic, for example, we were transporting Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. And then we are reliable in strong winds, heavy rains, and high temperatures. And I'll explain to you why is it important for us to be this reliable and some of the amazing work that we do that require us to build this kind of technology. Next slide. The way it all works, if I can tell you a bit more on the technology before we move to the service side, I think for this to be able to work, you have to buy in the regulators and the other stakeholders in the airspace. And some of the thinking that we've put into that is the fact that they fly autonomously on what we call pre-approved routes. And that allows regulators to know exactly where each of our drone is. We've also built a technology that we call, it's a birdwatch application essentially, and tools to track each of the drones where it is in real time. And this allows a better coordination by aviation authority, air traffic controls, and other stakeholders that are interested in this. And then we also equip it with redundant flight control systems so that the drone can always be flying and be reliable. And we can fly many of them at the same time. Next slide. So the way that the system works is a health facility pretty much place a node at Zipline. We do the fulfillment within a few minutes, so the pick and packing, and then the drone takes off, and then the drone makes the delivery, and then the drone returns. So all of this can be done in less than 30 minutes for each single need. Next. And so, yeah, as I said, you know, when we receive the order, the way we pack it is we put it in the belly of the drone if you want. Then it is accelerated to 100 kilometers in less than 1 second. It will navigate, as I showed you, on a pre-planned routes and then deliver the packages. And then it will lower kind of the package itself and then deliver the package in which has a parachute at the health facility, and the drone returns directly to base to land. Next slide. And so I think the slides got a bit messed up, but you will allow me to kind of speak through them, how they show up. So this should have come earlier, but we do have the warehousing and fulfillment. When we started here in Rwanda a couple of years ago, we were doing just drone delivery. And when I joined the company, it was just doing drone delivery. But then we realized, like, really people don't care so much about the drone. All they care about is the efficiencies that you are able to create in the supply chain system. And I'll tell you the story of one of the impact stories that we have in Rwanda, but we kind of started creating what we call fulfillment as a service, which is what I led very early on in pretty much building a pharmacy that is co-located with a drone, if you want to hear about it. And so we have the warehousing piece of it. We have the integration with upstream suppliers, and then we do everything around fulfillment and customer service, whether that's receiving orders, pick and packing, shipping, and then doing aftercare for clinicians and the likes. And for pharmacists is quite important because sometimes the small health facilities across the country, the nurses who manage them are given the task of managing really big inventories. And that's more than 4,000 SKUs. And they really don't know everything about all those products. They don't even know the best practices of managing warehouses and stock. And they usually get trained once every year or something like that, or sometimes once in their career. And so having pharmacists on site, they are able to also coach them and help them and support them as they those are the ones who are really the primary care service providers in many of the countries that we operate in. And care is optimized across the board because even if there is a good clinical care, often than not, there won't be an optimized care from the pharmaceutical side of things, especially if it's a nurse who's having to manage both the inventory, but also helping patients take their medication appropriately. So that's also something that we are able to do. It's like a pharmacy coach remotely to help, and that's what we call customer support, to help these nurses manage their health posts or health centers appropriately. Next slide. And when you run this kind of operation at a significant scale, it's really important that you provide not only visibility, but also this data that we are able to collect. And being a very innovative company, we kind of realized you wouldn't be building robots that fly only without really helping the actionable and the insights and the decision making that comes out of running this kind of system in a country. And Rwanda, Ghana were the first countries in the world to launch this kind of system at national scale. And that was so important that they get all the value that they could get out of it, including deciding what is some of the best way to manage your supply chain. That could be the most basic thing, like centralizing all products that are sporadically used, like snake antivenom, in one location and only deliver it when it's needed. To avoid that every clinic has 10 or 20 of those and get wasted because no one is ever bitten by a snake. And it could be even more complex decision during the pandemic, for example, things like gloves, painkillers, which were usually products that are widely available, became very scarce and needed to be centralized, and we needed to ration them across the country. And so we are able to provide those insights and are able to work with partners to optimize not only the operation side of things, but also the policy making. For example, you even have the need to decentralize certain treatments, like in Rwanda. I'll tell you about it, like some rare blood products like fresh frozen plasma or other type of products were never provided at a lower level. But with this, we were able to show people that it's possible to deliver them at lower level and not only at teaching or referral hospitals. And you can see that across the spectrum of clinical care. That could be for cancer medication, for example, and other medication where patients have to come from far to come to pick them at the central level. But for us, it's really less about bringing the patient to the medication and taking the medication as close to the patient as possible. And then we also have other aspects of optimizing different workflows, like the paperwork that gets involved in people exchanging medical products and so on and so forth. We try and digitize all of those aspects. Next slide. And for this technology to be able to work, you have to scale it. And this is a combination of how do you reduce the cost to make it worth of the investments that our partners have to put in. And that's one of the things that we've been working on. I just wanted to make sure I am able to show this, because today the cost may be quite high because it's new, it's only operating a few flights, and our technology is also very new. In 2016, it was very, very difficult and expensive to manufacture this kind of technology. But over the years, as we get better and better at making the drones, at building the system, as we get better integrated into the healthcare system to operate at a significant scale, the costs end up really significantly reducing, and often they're not matching what it is that is done today. But that is without thinking about the impact. You cannot attach a cost to the value of life saved. You cannot attach a cost on all the optimization that happen across the health system. This is just purely on the delivery aspect of things. If you do want to do a one-to-one comparison, let's say with a motorbike or a truck. Next slide. And I think for the last 6 years, what this has given us is really being the pioneer of autonomy and airspace deconfliction for drones. On the technology side, we are able to deeply integrate within the healthcare system and supply chain systems. We collect so much data that can be used across the board, whether it's for the drone technology, whether it's for improving the impact that we get to have on the service and the healthcare side, but also significantly reducing the costs in terms of just building the technology, but also in terms of making these services available for citizens. And we've significantly increased our scale by expanding to many more countries across the world. We are in Rwanda, in Ghana, in Nigeria. We are soon launching in Cote d'Ivoire and Kenya. Outside the African continent, we are in the US and Japan. So we are really taking this technology across the board, across the world, so that everyone who needs to is able to benefit from this kind of services that we provide. And we remain very flexible and scrappy, given that that's our identity as an innovator, to be able to develop a platform where any medical product can be delivered anywhere. And you can solve all the problems that you've ever imagined. And it allows, pharmacists and other healthcare professionals to really focus on the core of what they're mostly passionate and well-trained about, which is providing the right care and not really spending time into the operational and technicalities of the rest of their job. Next slide on the impact now. Next, please. I think our benefits are varied across the healthcare system, and you know, we can speak about the first thing is instant access to medical supply. That means you can deliver anything, anywhere, where we can ensure reliability and speed. And I will give you examples as I speak about specific use cases. The second thing is cost saving across the healthcare system by eliminating overstocking, eliminating stockouts, reducing referrals. For example, not everyone needs to be referred to a big hospital to get treatment, and significantly reducing wastage by making sure that no one is overstocking themselves, but everyone is just receiving products that they need, as long as they can rely on a system that can restock them on time, or even give them emergency medical products, like I mentioned earlier, for ration products like, or sporadically used products like snake antivenom, or even COVID vaccines if need be. Much better emergency and disaster response when things are, you know, centralized and pre-positioned and rapidly delivered. We've seen that during COVID. All the countries that had this infrastructure, they were able to respond much, much faster. One example is Gavi and the WHO, when they set up the COVAX facility. The first country to receive vaccines from that facility was Ghana. And that's because they had an infrastructure to ensure that they can distribute the vaccine equitably, which was very different from what was happening in other countries where the big capitals and the elite were receiving the drugs and the vaccines first, and the rest of the citizens would get them later. And some countries just couldn't even distribute the vaccines because they had no system in place, and whatever was being used before was so strained to even sustain the continuous provision of care. And of course, there is better medical outcomes when you have product availability, when you have a better supply chain. That means everyone is treated with the first products that they should be treated with, and not alternatives. So that reduces that increases faster care provision, that increases adherence to treatment when you don't have to wait 2-3 days for you to be resupplied, and so on and so forth. Or when you don't have to be sent back because you came to pick your next dosage of HIV medication and you are told that they will be back in 5 days, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. And remember the first slide where I showed you the baseline that's down here. And this is a comparison where now we can see delivery time, which would used to take up to 26 days, now reduced to only about 2 hours, or 1 hour and 30 minutes in most cases. We are much, much more precise in terms of delivery of medical products. Usually a hospital or a clinic would wait, it would kind of have 2-3 days from when the scheduled delivery was happening. Now it happens within 4 hours. We are much more reliable in terms of 87% of products requested are supplied. And it's much, much more cost effective on a per unit basis in many ways. Is my time up? If someone is unmuting themselves, I'll have to go faster. Next slide, please. And of course, there is also a reduction of carbon emission than a car-based logistics network. Because we are battery powered, we are also creating the sustainability aspect into a supply chain system. And this was based on our deliveries of of blood units here in Rwanda, where by a ton of carbon emitted, we are significantly lower than any other alternative that was used before. Whether that's for all deliveries or emergency deliveries. And we have an interesting case that is published on our website, but also by the World Economic Forum on this. Next slide. I think I can speak briefly about how we integrate into the healthcare system so that you understand, for those of you who want the technicalities aspects. I think it's 3 aspects. Essentially, it's on-demand delivery. So every product that is emergency is entirely centralized at Zipline. We keep it in our fridges, in every other product, and then we deliver it only when it's needed and when there is a patient who needs it. For some products, it's also just timely replenishment when there is a disaster response and those kind of things. But then you also have cold chain products or other difficult products where we are the main infrastructure to deliver those, whether they are emergency or non-emergencies. Many of the injectables used tend to be very difficult to manage across the country. And so it's better to have a system that you can rely on and reducing wastages. We also do efficient routine distribution. So for some health facilities, they are very, very hard to reach, or they are located, in areas that are prone to flooding, or they are located on islands. These are much better served by a system like ours, and they rely often than not entirely on our system for all their product needs in some of the countries where we are. But then, as I mentioned, I gave you the examples of rare, hard to stock, sporadically or unique products in any way that only come in by drone delivery. And here in Rwanda, we are trying to work on really delivering to people's homes directly. When a patient is diabetic, when a patient is taking cancer medication for lifetime, you don't really need them to always travel to a specialist hospital. In countries like Rwanda, it's one hospital in the capital, and someone is traveling 7 or more hours while they are healthy, and all they need is refill of medication. And sometimes they can even just talk to their doctor by phone or via WhatsApp. And so what we are really doing is be able to deliver directly to their homes for those type of unique conditions. And also it's really telemedicine. With the pandemic, we saw that everyone can now check in with their doctor and care provider. But they still had to walk outside and go find the drug at the pharmacy. So this is kind of another way of complementing some of those developments that are happening in the healthcare system, and really, plugging in from one platform, you can really manage patients' care in better ways. And here in countries like the US, we work with advanced healthcare systems such as Novant Healthcare and the others to be able to provide this kind of services. So those of you who are or are close to North Carolina, you probably have heard about our drone delivery there in this manner. Next slide. 2 case studies, and then I'll open it up to questions. The first one is in Rwanda. Before Zipline, there was a way that blood was distributed across the country. There were collection sites, and then hospitals would have to travel to come and pick up blood. And rare blood products such as fresh frozen plasma, cryoprecipitates were only transfused at teaching hospitals and referral hospitals, which is very inconvenient for the patient. And it increases maternal mortality, makes it difficult to treat malaria, anemia, and other conditions. But with Zipline, what we were able to do is simple, centralizing all blood products, because there is also a supply issue. People are not donating enough blood. So we were able to centralize all medical products, set up minimum and maximums for every health facility, and then do on-demand distribution. So that turned ourselves into the only supplier of blood products outside the capital here in Rwanda, and no other way that the hospital receive it. And so that means that even rare blood products that were only used at referral hospitals in big cities can now be accessed anywhere in the country. And this has allowed the government in Rwanda to keep blood free, one of the very few countries that does that, where processing and distribution also ensure equitable access. Anyone, anywhere can receive blood, and it's not for the privileged ones. But this also gives you an idea of how reliable the technology has to be. And the best way to think about it, a doctor shows up at the hospital, someone comes after an accident, or a woman giving birth, or a malaria person on emergency, and they place an order by Zipline. We have absolutely no excuse to not make the delivery, whether it's raining, whether it's at night, whether anything, we have to make the delivery. So that gives you an idea of the kind of technology we had to build so that we can be trusted and be a reliable and service to this point. So that kind of help you understand what kind of system we've built over the last few years. The next case study on the next slide, please, is something I mentioned in Ghana, where we have about 8 hubs that cover almost 70% of the country. It was so difficult to reach remote communities. Many people would miss opportunities for vaccination because there were stock out. You show up to your clinic, and many of you have seen pictures of nurses and really heroes in the healthcare system who try to cross the river by using ropes, by climbing on trees, by swimming across, and those kind of things. It delays them. It makes sure the vaccines are not usually in good condition when they reach there. It's only by luck that 1 or 2 vials would be working. During the pandemic, we had a huge issue. The vaccines are available, but we have to store them in cold chain equipment. And how do you invest in all these cold chain equipment? How do you get big manufacturers for cold chain equipment to manufacture, I don't know, thousands, millions of fridges in a few months in time to deploy the vaccines? That's why rich countries were really fast and able to do so. And developing countries couldn't do so because they just didn't have a way to not only get the vaccines, but also to build the equipment that's required. And one of the ways that Zipline does that, some health facilities entirely rely on us for all their vaccines requested. So we do, again, the same model. We centralize everything. We have better fridges, and we only deliver when there is a vaccination campaign. We deliver a few vaccines at a time throughout the day, and so on and so forth. We even came up with a packaging system and solution for COVID-19 mRNA-based vaccines that required ultra cold chain vaccines. Next slide is really about all the type of pharmaceuticals that we get to deliver, where, you know, I spoke through this. There are many difficulties in delivering different pharmaceuticals. And this shows you, at least last year, the type of medical products we were delivering. We do have so many SKUs that we do deliver across the board, but essentially centralizing and distributing things like antivenom, anti-rabies. We do provide stock gap resupply for certain health facilities to reduce their overstocking and stockouts, and even allow them to optimize their cash flow at the hospital. Instead of having a health facility that has all their money on shelves, they can invest in another bed or another thing that add more value to the service that they provide than having, you know, overflowing medical products and so on. And we are also the sole distributor for medical plus supplies for many health facilities, as I just mentioned. Next slide. I think that's where we try and end. I think our future is really, and this is more of a call to action, but also an inspiration. It's to really get you to think, like, you know, as pharmacists, we were the ones to really think of what it is that these drones could do, but how do you actually make them do the most useful things? Many of you in developed countries know drones in mostly warfare, but in developing countries, it was all about a reinvention. They call them in our local languages, ambulances in the sky. They happen to also be red and white. But I'm imagining in an urban environment, for example, in all the ways that logistics and supply chain is going to change. E-commerce has turned all of us into people who order everything we need by phone. And some of the companies have gotten really well to make this so comfortable. I just think healthcare shouldn't stay behind and really should embrace innovation. And it's all for the benefit of the patient and making sure we provide the best possible care out there. Thank you so much all for listening. I'm happy to take any question if we still have time. If not, I'm available via email, on social media, and always happy to speak and discuss this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Israel, for sharing your knowledge and experience in a outstanding technology used across the continent of Africa, overcoming logistic and supply chain issues. We do have an opportunity for questions and comments. I know it's early in the morning in the US and this afternoon in Europe, but if there are questions or comments for people online, can you put those into the chat? And whilst you're putting this, got my wrong glasses.
They're all compliments.
Excellent work, Israel. But are there any questions or comments from the floor here in Sydney?
Yeah, I'll tell you.
Israel won't be able to hear you.
Maybe, maybe just explore who pays, how is it remunerated?
So, Israel, we have a question from Sydney. Who pays for Zipline? How is the service funded? Who develops the technology? Where did it come from?
Zipline is a Silicon Valley company based out of South San Francisco. So we develop the technology ourselves. We design, build and manufacture everything that you saw. And we also provide the service aspect of it across the world. And so who pays for it? It's usually governments. I think it's important that we are able to provide the service at scale. And often they're not governments are the only ones to ensure this scale. But also we've always wanted the service to benefit across government. So that's why we do blood, medical products, and vaccines. Usually they sit under different government departments, but for us, it's like a road, it's an infrastructure. Anyone can drive on it, and why not utilize those economies of scale and reduce the cost across the board and departments. So it's usually government, and we partner with them for large scale implementation of this project at national scale mainly. However, in countries like the US, we do work with health systems like Novant Healthcare in the US and the equivalent in other countries. Intermountain, for example, for those of you who may recognize these names. Someone is asking about the investment. I'm happy to speak those through. Some of these numbers are confidential, and we speak to them according to the kind of investment that's needed in a country. But yeah.
Israel, there's some questions in the chat. Are you able to see those?
Yeah, I'm seeing them and happy to answer them. Someone asked about when are we coming to Australia? I think actually the person who leads our international expansion is Australian, so I'll make sure to transmit it to her, although she's based in the US. And very soon, we actually did some work in Australia around disaster response with the Australian military some years ago. It was mostly seeing what role we can do in case of fire or those kind of issues. Some of my thoughts on drone technology will further innovate delivery. I think in urban areas, I think in the next 3 to 5 years, drones will be flying in a city near you and delivering food and everything. And for me, I want to imagine how does it augment things like personalized care, but also ensuring that patients receive the most optimal care possible. And we are seeing things like wearables and devices being such a pertinent aspect of our lifestyle on a day-to-day basis. And so, drones will be part of that new ecosystem that's based on device and advanced technology in many ways. Yes, we do navigate to private households, which is one of the biggest issue people have. In the US, we deliver to people's homes directly. But we are designing and building the technologies and working with regulators and communities in a way that it doesn't invade privacy, it doesn't make so much noise, and ensure that it really serves its purpose for delivering to someone and people's homes in the most convenient possible way. So that's what I would say to the questions in the chat.
Thank you very much, Israel, for an excellent presentation and for so generously sharing your experience with this technology. Thank you for accepting the invitation to speak at ISPW 2022. I do thank you for your time. One more time, please thank Israel for an excellent.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.